Lord Mayor, Madam Mayoress, Lady Mayoress, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. When I received my knighthood just over 2 years ago, I really thought that's as good as it gets. Nothing could be better. I was so honoured and proud to visit Buckingham Palace. But I have to say that being granted an honorary freedom of the city by the people of the city of Newcastle upon Tyne is for me one of the most proudest moments of my life, and I stand here full of personal emotion and humility. It is a huge honour, extremely flattering, a feeling of great privilege, one that I respect, and to follow such distinguished people as Jimmy Carter, Bob Geldof, Jackie Milburn, Alan Shearer, Nelson Mandela, I'm told, Johnny Wilkinson, and many others makes this for me a truly unforgettable day. My father and mother would be so chuffed and tickled pink of this particular moment and would place today, without doubt, the best day of all for one of their 5 sons. On the day of my investiture at the palace 2 years ago, there were only 2 people being knighted that day, myself and a person called Jonathan Miller. Now, I don't know if you know Jonathan Miller, but I remember him on television one day on the Michael Parkinson show when he stole the show for the whole 45 minutes. He's a great entrepreneur, playwright, symphony conductor, doctor by profession, very cerebral, and I recognized him when I went into the hall. So I went up to him and I said, "Good morning, Jonathan, congratulations. I'm very pleased to know you." So he looked at me and said, "So who are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm Bobby Robson." He said, "Right." So he said, "So what do you do?" And I said, "Well, I'm the manager of Newcastle United Football Club." "Oh," he said. "Do you know," he said, "I've never been or seen a football match in all of my life." He said, "In fact," he said, "when we had PT at school and they played football, I used to go behind the bicycle shed." So I thought, well, I'm not going to let him get one on me. So I said, "Well, I used to go behind the bicycle shed, but it was never to stop playing football." So today is totally different from that day, although I wish I had invited Jonathan Miller. But it is wonderful to be in the presence of you all, my family, my friends, colleagues from work, contacts, well-wishers, officials, and again, my father and my mother would have loved this. My mother and my father brought me up in this football crazy world that I've lived in the last 50 years. My father bled black and white. My father was black and white. My father was a miner for 51 years. My father went to work white and came home black. There were no curry baths in those days. A bath was a tin bath in front of the fire. But he loved and he adored Newcastle United. And he brought me up to be the same. And my father went to the 1932 Cup final. Now that was the year that Newcastle United beat Arsenal 2-1. And there was some doubt about one of the goals, the legality of one of the goals that Arsenal complained about, and they've never stopped complaining since. That the ball was over the line before Richardson crossed the ball for Jackie Allen to head the ball into the back of the net, which was the goal that won Newcastle the Cup in 1932. So there's a doubt about that goal. But my father will tell you that ball was never over the line. That was the most legitimate goal ever seen at Wembley. And the fact that my father was only 5'10" was behind the goal at the other end of the pitch, but saw quite clearly from 160 yards that the ball was never over the line, has no bearing on that result at all. I have to tell you this, exactly 9 months later, to the day almost, my father was so elated at the victory, I was born. So May the 7th, 1932, February the 18th, 1933, work it out. And so that passion, that feel, that fuel for Newcastle grew and grew and continued. And my father took my brother and I, who's here today. My father had 5 sons. He could only afford to take 2 to watch St. James's, to go to St. James's Park to watch United. So we used to come to Newcastle and we would be first in the queue. 10 o'clock bus out of Langley Park, arrive at Marlborough Crescent, walk up to the Phoenix, cup of tea, little bun, ham bun, and first in the queue before the gates opened. And my brother will tell you that. And we used to run up when the gates were opened to be in that unreserved section at St. James's Park, front row, to watch the team. And Albert Stubbins was my hero. I don't know if I'm taking you far down the track, but I loved Albert Stubbins, and Newcastle sold him for 13,000. I remember coming home, my father said, "You've never guessed what they've done, Bobby." I said, "What, Dad?" He said, "They've sold Albert Stubbins." I said, "They haven't." He said, "They've sold him for 13,000. I couldn't believe it. We keep doing it, don't we? Just the bad ones. And many, many years later, I was manager at Ipswich, and my secretary rang up and said, "Mr. Robson, there's a Mr. Stubbins on the phone. Sounds a bit nervous. He says he's a reporter and would like to talk to you." And I said, "Fine." Picked up the telephone and I said, "Listen, before I say anything to you," I said, "You're not Albert Stubbins, are you? The Albert Stubbins who played for Newcastle?" He said, "Yes, I am." And he was nervous to talk to me. I said, "Albert, you are my hero. I've loved you. Listen," I said to him, "any Thursday afternoon, you can ring me every week, and whatever story I've got in my head, you can get it." And that was Albert Stubbins. And so I remember those days, just after the war, when I was 13, 14, 15. Swinburne, Cowell, Corbett, Harvey, Brennan, Crowe, Walker, Tommy Taylor, Jackie Milburn, George Robledo, Tommy Pearson. I remember Shackleton coming. On his first match, scored 6 goals. Beat you, Alan. Alan scored 5 one day. Shack got 6. You missed a couple of sitters that day, Alan. So we won 8-0 on my first return back as manager, and Alan got 5 that day. I saw Shackleton score 6 against Newport County. So they were great days for me, and I just loved all the players. And believe it or not, came to 1950. I was 17 years of age. I was black and white. I signed for Fulham. My father couldn't believe it. He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I don't know." How did Alan Shearer sign for Southampton? We did the same, Alan. Crazy about Newcastle, but we don't sign for them. So why? And I remember coming later on, and I played for Fulham against Newcastle, and I scored, and I didn't like it, and I was coming back to the halfway line. I was trying to find my dad in the stand. And I knew he wasn't staring at me, he was glaring at me. And I was staying overnight. I was going home that night to stay and see my parents after the match. I thought, gee, I hope Newcastle score. And they did, and so, you know, it was 1-1, and so my father wasn't so angry with me. So I went to Fulham and I met Johnny Haynes, and I have to just say this, Johnny Haynes was coming here today. He lives in Edinburgh. His train has been cancelled because of the snow. And I did invite Johnny Haynes to come here, who was the captain of England. I played with him for many, many years, 12 years at Fulham and 4 years in the England team. And he was a great buddy of mine, and I would have loved Johnny Haynes to have been here today, but he sent his apologies. I've got Malcolm MacDonald here, who I brought into the game, paid £1,000 for him. Not a shrewd man, was I? And you know the story of Malcolm. I believe Gaz is here, and I'm delighted that, you know, he had an operation yesterday in London, but he's here today. He's a good guy, is that Gaz going, I'll tell you. So I grew up and I saw all that, and I saw the 1951, the 1952, the 1955 cup finals that Newcastle won against Arsenal, against Blackpool, against Manchester City. I've got my ticket here. FA Cup final ticket, 7th of May, 1955. 3 shillings and sixpence. Had to stand with my wife behind the goal. No disputed goal that day, by the way. Newcastle won fair and square, 3-1, and Jackie got a header. Absolutely fantastic. And so I had that life. And then my life took me away from the Northeast for a vast number of years, really. Until I was invited back a little over 5 years ago when I got a call from Freddie Shepherd and Freddie Fletcher to return to be the team manager of Newcastle United. And again, my mother and father, they would have done somersaults with great delight and excitement, even at their age, the fact that I was returning. It was a dream come true for me. And I've returned to my roots, where I was born, where I was bred, where I was semi-educated. I didn't go to university. I was at the University of Adversity, but not really. I'm just trying to make you laugh. Where we got married, and my wife Elsie and I are so happy to be back home. This is where we come from. This is where we want to be. This is where we're going to stay for the rest of our lives. This is utopia.